Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of the hour. Iran's foreign minister arrives in Oman for nuclear talks with the United States and calls for mutual respect. Tehran says it seeks a durable deal based on equal standing and honoured commitments as an American naval buildup sits in the Persian Gulf. The US military says it kills 2 people in a strike on a suspected drug vessel in the Eastern Pacific. Officials say the boat is operating on known narco-trafficking routes and no US forces are hurt. Russia and Ukraine conclude a second round of US-brokered talks in Abu Dhabi and agree to resume negotiations. Both sides carry out a swap of 314 prisoners of war, the first in 5 months. US President Donald Trump launches a new website called Trump RX, aimed at lowering prescription costs in the US. The site allows consumers to buy discounted medicines directly from pharmaceutical companies. Netanyahu releases selected transcripts saying security chiefs assessed Gaza as stable and downplayed Hamas's threat before October the 7th. He argues key information was not passed to him and places responsibility on the IDF and Shin Bet. Trump rejects Putin's offer to extend expired nuclear arms limits and calls for a new treaty. He says a modernized deal should replace what he calls a badly negotiated agreement and has previously urged China's involvement. Trump endorses Japan's Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi ahead of Sunday's snap election. The move is rare but follows his recent backing of other foreign leaders. Russia's Belgorod governor says nighttime Ukrainian shelling causes serious damage in the border city. Officials hold an emergency meeting to plan the response. Those are the headlines, and we start this hour with our top story coming out of the Middle East. And Iran and the United States are set to begin talks today in Oman, focusing on Iran's nuclear program. The Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has arrived in Muscat, calling for mutual respect ahead of the negotiations, emphasizing that commitments must be honoured for a lasting agreement. Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner will lead the American side. With raising tensions and US military build-up in the region, the talks aim to address nuclear issues, although the US seeks a broader agenda, including ballistic missiles and regional proxies. While both sides are far apart, the outcome of these crucial talks remains uncertain. Joining us to discuss this is Dr. Punsara Amarasinghe, a Middle East affairs expert, joining us live from Koltawala Defence University, joining us live from Colombo in Sri Lanka. Thank you very much, Dr. Amarasinghe, for joining us here on NewsX World. A significant day. All eyes are on Muscat, with the United States vying for more than Iran wants to discuss when it comes to these negotiations. With the what Donald Trump calls an armada built up in the Persian Gulf, what would be the best case scenario coming out of these talks, and what would be the worst?
Well, for me, I think it seems to be a worst case scenario, because before discussing about the potential meeting of Witkoff and Kushner at their meeting with Iranian foreign minister, we need to understand the imperative of the context. This context comes in the middle of a likely escalation. As you pointed out, President Trump has come up with a clear threat ending the regime in Tehran. And at the same time, Americans have deployed USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier in Arabian Sea. And in the meantime, IRGC has demanded that they would seize one of the US merchant vessels near the Strait of Hormuz. So it's a kind of a bleak situation. It is under this bleak situation the discussion is likely to happen. But if you look at the positive side, we need to understand that Iran comes with expectation of going for a deal, because deal is essentially important for their survival, as the economy has been deteriorated and there were a number of protests against Iranian regime. So definitely they would come up with a deal, and that is why they wanted to change the venue from Turkey to Oman, which is a bit more neutral for their stances to discuss about nuclear issue. So they want to keep stockpiling of the missiles, ballistic missiles, and their main issues related to their regional proxies such as Houthis and Hezbollah aside. They simply want to focus on the issue related to nuclear weapons, the nuclear program. But I'm not sure to which extent Washington is willing to accept this condition, because it's not on Iranian ball, because the ball has simply shifted to the Washington side to come up with their bargain. But I hope this discussion will definitely compel both parties to take more neutral stances in the long run.
Do you think neutral is going to be the way forward for either? Of course, when we saw the two sides indirectly meet last, from April to June, there were meetings in Muscat, where we're seeing those talks today, and in Rome. Since then, of course, we've seen a 12-day war with Israel, where their missile capabilities have been hit by Israel. And of course, we've also seen this brutal crackdown on protesters at the start of this year. And that armada, Donald Trump calls it an armada, waiting in the Persian Gulf. Does that signal that, of course, these talks are going to be very different when it comes to this time around?
Well, as I told you quite clearly, the stances are more or less in favor of Washington because they have something to bargain, as ball lies on their court, not in Tehran, because Tehran simply wants to survive in the long run, as their regime internally is deteriorating. It's kind of a teetering on the edge. As you precisely observed, the 12 days war last year demonstrated the vulnerability of Tehran before the world. I mean, we witnessed the weaknesses of Iranian armed forces, even though they were targeting Israeli sites from ballistic missiles, and they were not enough to prevent Israeli armed forces, especially Israeli Air Force, from penetrating into the Tehranian space. So the 12 days war was one of the great exposure which simply demonstrated, simply unveiled the Iranian vulnerability, and then it was followed by a mass wave of the protest movements. So in this context, I think to a great extent that Tehran will do everything to focus essentially on the nuclear development. They just want to discuss about the nuclear issues, but I think the Washington is not willing to confine the discussions only up to the nuclear deal. They simply want to focus much further, right? But I don't think so. The issues related to regime change or the current political instability or the unrest will be raised in the discussion.
Why does the support for regional proxies and that ballistic missile program seem to be a red line for Tehran?
Well, because if you simply look at the strategic imperative, the apparatuses of IRGC from the very inception, the Iranian regime cemented their power based on three important pillars. First one was their political stability within Iran, which was grounded on strict Shiite ideology. Secondly, they were trying to improve their ties with their regional partners by spreading the Shia ideology and also providing armed assistance that included organizations such as Houthis and Hezbollah. And thirdly, they wanted to promote Tehran as the emerging leader of Islamic world against United States and the global West. But now when you look at the decline of all three pillars, at the end of the day, they cannot sustain without having larger support from their regional allies, because it was their regional allies who supported and bolstered Tehranian objectives in the Middle East. The Tehran did not directly involve in any war with Israel until last year. On the contrary, they were using their proxies such as Houthis and Hezbollah to accomplish their military targets. At the same time, they were quite obsessed with increasing their ballistic missile capabilities to deter Israel. So that is why ballistic missile issue and the proxies remain to be the pillar, the red line of Tehran.
Do stay with us, Dr. Amar Singh, as we turn to our next story. And we head to Europe. And Norway's Economic Crime Police Unit has said that it has opened an investigation into former Prime Minister and Chairman of the Norwegian Nobel Committee, Thorbjørn Jagland, on a suspicion of aggravated corruption. The decision to investigate Jagland, also a former Secretary of General Europe, was based on information revealed by newly released files related to the US late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. According to reports, Jagland has not been charged with any crime, and the investigation will, among other things, cover whether gifts, travel and loans were received in connection with his position. And so the Jeffrey Epstein saga continues, with the tentacles of his influence spanning the space of Europe. We've of course seen him and revelations come out about his involvement in the life of the Crown Prince of Norway, and now one of Norway's most valuable institutions, the Nobel Committee, where Norway's Economic Crime Police have opened an investigation into Thorbjørn Jagland on suspicion of aggravated corruption. He's a former Prime Minister and former Secretary General of the Council of Europe and former Chairman of the Norwegian Nobel Committee. This investigation follows information contained in the newly released files linked to Jeffrey Epstein. Authorities say that Jagland has not been charged with any crime, but the probe has been launched and will examine whether gifts, travel or loans were received in connection with Jagland's official positions. And so we say that Jeffrey Epstein, that is, cast a far net that over Europe. We've seen his infiltrations into figures in the British government, the French government, and now Norway seeming to be a place where Jeffrey Epstein's influence was also found. As investigators sieve through those 3 million files dropped by the Department of Justice just a couple of days ago, new revelations are coming out every single day, affecting officials and powerful figures all over the world. Of course, there is more to come when it comes to learning who is implicated in these stories. As we've said previously, that Norway has opened this corruption probe into Thorbjørn Jagland over these Epstein-linked files. He is Norway's economic crime. He is Norway's former Prime Minister and a former Secretary General of the Council of Europe, and of course a former Chairman of the Norwegian Nobel Committee. This investigation is following the information contained in this new tranche of files linked to Jeffrey Epstein. Okay, we're going to move on now. And Russia and Ukraine conducted their first large-scale prisoner exchange in nearly 5 months, with each side returning 157 detainees each. This came after the second round of US-brokered talks that concluded in Abu Dhabi yesterday. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that those released include both military personnel and civilians. In a statement issued earlier, the United Arab Emirates Ministry of Foreign Affairs welcomed cooperation between Russia and Ukraine on the prisoner exchange, saying it demonstrated the UAE's role as a reliable mediator in easing the crisis and promoting constructive dialogue. US President's Special Envoy Steve Witkoff said representatives from the US, Ukraine and Russia reached a consensus on a prisoner swap, describing the discussions as specific and constructive. Joining us now is Dr. Amarasinghe once again. Thank you very much. Pleasure once again. We don't know much about what's going on behind those doors in Abu Dhabi. However, this prisoner swap, it's happened before at talks agreed in Istanbul. How significant really is it? And is it a sign things are going well in the United Arab Emirates?
I don't think so, because as you stated, this prisoner swap is not the first time since the Russian aggression in Ukraine. Even after Istanbul, we saw one prisoner swap which ended up with no significant result. And this one is, of course, an offshoot of Abu Dhabi talks, which partially successfully ended. But this prisoner swap, when you look at it in depth, there are two implications. Firstly, I think it's a sign raised by Putin and Kiev that they are willing to negotiate in the long run under the terms given by President Trump for a ceasefire agreement. But while having in mind, we also should not forget the fact that for the past few weeks, right, Russia has been tremendously attacking the infrastructure facilities in Ukraine, worsening the situation. But when you look at the prisoner swap from the second implication, for both sides, it gives a moral booster, because both Ukrainian and Russian forces have suffered heavily, and both sides have undergone heavy casualties. And with regard to Russians, and there are people in Russia, there are people who have not heard a single news about their loved ones who went to war. So this is kind of a great energy booster to promote the morale of the Russian forces. But also when you look at the problem, when you look at the context, in a more systematic manner, it becomes obvious this prisoner swap will not be taken as a pretext or as a ground reason by Russians to thwart or to stop their military ventures in Ukraine, because even under the negotiations are going on, they have not completely stayed away from striking their targets in Ukraine.
Indeed. Dr. Amarasinghe, do stay with us. We are going back over to Norway. And the Economic Crime Police Unit has said that it has opened an investigation into the former Prime Minister and Chairman of the Norwegian Nobel Committee, Thorbjørn Jagland, on a suspicion of aggravated corruption. The decision to investigate Jagland, also a former Secretary General of Europe, was based on information revealed by newly released files related to the US late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. According to reports, Jagland has not been charged with any crime, and the investigation will, among other things, cover whether gifts, travel and loans were received in connection with his position. Okay, of course, Norway's Economic Crime Police have opened an investigation into the former Prime Minister and ex-Norwegian Nobel Committee Chairman Thorbjørn Jagland on suspicion of aggravated corruption, but public and media attention is increasingly centred on the royal family, particularly on Mette Marit, as the controversy widens across the globe. The probe into Jagland, who also served as Secretary General of the Council of Europe, is based on information contained in newly released files linked to late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Investigators are examining whether gifts, travel or loans may have been received in connection with Jagland's official positions. Authorities stress that Jagland has not been charged with any crime. However, the case has sparked a broader national debate with intense scrutiny of past contacts between Epstein and prominent Norwegian figures, including questions about his historical links involving Princess Mette Marit, pushing the royal family into the spotlight and fueling a sensitive political and institutional controversy in Norway. Joining us now is retired Major General Araghchi, a senior strategic and international affairs expert, joining us live from Jaipur. Thank you very much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to talk to you here on NewsX World. What does this tell us, of course, about the institutions, the organizations Epstein was able to infiltrate? Of course, we've just covered the chief of the World Economic Forum, also involved, and now a former Prime Minister of Norway, a former chairman of the Nobel Prize Committee, one of Norway's most valuable, if not most valuable, institution. We've also seen him be involved in the British government with the likes of Peter Mandelson. Epstein's interest and involvement in European high figures, how did he do it and why did he do it?
Unfortunate, pathetic, simply pathetic, Thomas. There is nothing more to define and comment on. This is terrible that is coming out slowly and gradually. And I would say more than the geopolitical churn is the character is taking the beating of all these high profile personalities. And you name anything, everything seems to be been penetrated and rotting with the kind of Epstein file and the interpretation which a common man understands today. Tomorrow, after the investigation is over, maybe it will paint a different picture, but at the moment, I feel totally shocked and surprised as to how can this happen. So that's all at the moment. Back to you, Thomas.
Indeed, and as we've said, of course, Norway, a country you wouldn't expect to be of interest with an American financier. However, a country which, of course, we're seeing a former Prime Minister, a former head of the Nobel Committee, and also a part of the royal family involved with Epstein, with some correspondence between both Mr. Epstein and even the Crown Princess of the country, who's currently facing backlash over even her communications with the late financier. How would Jeffrey Epstein operate, and what was he trying to get out of these interactions with these individuals coming out of Scandinavia?
This is highly scandalous. You see, I'm started suspecting. I only hope that it was not done purely out of a design of conspiracy, because you find almost all the presidents who are surviving in the US, barring a few exceptions, they are figuring. The Commerce Secretary is figuring. Andrew is figuring from the royal family, UK, and here is one Nobel. The chief or the head of the Nobel Committee, he is figuring. The former Prime Minister of Norway. Norway is considered and still by far the best. It's a clean distinction of its character or ethics and the moral values, the democratic norms. Now, what else is left in the world order? So I am getting a sense of that feeling is coming into me that perhaps there is some agency behind the scene which is actually doing all this by design, and it's a deeper conspiracy by the day. You never know, in times ahead there are new names which may prop up. Back to you, Thomas.
Indeed. And of course, this comes as people continue to sieve through those Epstein files, over 3 million documents that we are, of course, finding new revelations every day. Of course, what does this say about the current discourse when it comes to politics? Do you think people were going to trust their politicians again? Of course, it comes in a time where people already, particularly in Europe, have this huge distrust when it comes to their politicians. It's seen the rise of populism among other things in Europe. Do you think this scandal is going to be some sort of tipping point when it comes to that?
Yes, Thomas. A travesty of, I would say, disorder than what we are witnessing today. And I would say that maybe, for all you know, this may be tip of the iceberg. And therefore, worse than the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and the Middle East, this is what, if the leadership of the world order is decimated in this, the character is decimated in this manner, it's a character assassination of a person. His image is gone. If that happens, then the perception of the people to look at a particular country and the citizens of that country also gets colored. So that is going to bring about a whole change. I only hope and suspect that it is not true, that there is some bigger design behind all this, and people seem to have been trapped, or at that point in time, Epstein may have been maintaining a very, very noble status, and now all the blasphemous kind of activities are coming to light. Maybe these things are, and timing, look at the timing, how is it coming out gradually and incrementally. Very, very dangerous scene. I think it doesn't portend well for the well-meaning trajectory of the global order. I fear something disastrous is round the corner, whether it is America or particularly Europe. Now that Norway is figuring, it is the Nordic countries are supposed to have a very special status as far as the moral values are concerned. I actually see a lot of dangers around the corner. Back to you, Thomas.
Major General Araghchi, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us as always. It's a great pleasure to speak to you on these issues in particular. We now move on to our next story, and the UN has reported that the human rights situation in North Korea has seen no improvement over the past decade. Elizabeth Salmon, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the Democratic Republic of Korea, made the statement at a news briefing in Seoul. She emphasised that despite occasional reports of minor improvements in some areas, the situation has worsened for many people. Salmon's comments came after meetings with government officials, victims and defectors. Let's listen into what the UN Special Rapporteur Elizabeth Salmon had to say.
So, even amid the many difficult political situations around the world at the moment, human rights in the DPRK continue to be on the international community's agenda. The overall human rights situation of the last 10 years showed no improvement, and in many instances degraded, despite reports of a few improvements in some isolated issues.
Toyota has announced a leadership transition, with Chief Executive Koichi Sato set to step down after 3 years in charge. Toyota has said that its Chief Financial Officer, Kenta Kon, will take over as CEO from the 1st of April. Sato will transition to the role of Vice Chairman and assume a newly created position of Chief Industry Officer, where he will focus on broader industry engagement and external strategy. Toyota said the change is designed to accelerate management decision-making amid rapid shifts in the internal and external environment. The company added that the new structure will help it better carry out its mission of contributing to society through industry. Well, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.